Okay, good evening, Hopkinton. Welcome to the School Committee Public Forum on reopening. It is March 4th, 2021, and we are remote tonight, and I need to read a script from the governor. As a preliminary matter, this is Amanda Fargiano, Chair of the School Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Leah Batley-Rafferty.
Yes.
Meg Tyler.
Yes.
Joe Markey.
Here.
Nancy Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Carol Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Jen Parson.
Yes.
Susan Rothermick.
Yes.
And then everyone else. Anticipated speakers. We have a wonderful panel of panelists tonight. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Our principals, Lauren DeBow.
Yes.
Hello. Ann Carver.
Yes, hello.
Vanessa Bolello.
Yes. Hi.
Welcome. Alan Keller.
I'm here.
And Evan Bishop.
Yes. Hi.
People don't normally take attendance with you guys. This is like the shoe's on the other foot here. Okay.
I know how to answer it.
Head nurse Kathy Bain.
Hi.
Welcome. I think I already covered Susan. Tim Person, Director of Facilities.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Director of English for Speakers of Other Languages. That's ESOL, Equity and Access, Jen Super.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, welcome. And Director of Student Services, Karen Zaleski.
Hi.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for making the time to be here tonight. This open meeting of the Hopkinton School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, almost a year ago, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. We will not have a public comment section tonight. This entire meeting is dedicated to questions and answers on reopening. As I think everybody is aware, it's a unique sort of a meeting, so no public comment tonight. For this meeting, the school committee is convening via Zoom video conference as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM through its many channels. You can see this on HCAM's YouTube channel and on HCAM's cable television channel for education. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body and are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. I will say to members of the community, I'm hoping you already know this, but if not, all of the reopening materials, the report, and Dr. Kavanaugh's slideshow are available on the district website under the superintendent tab, and you'll see links to all of that. If you haven't seen it yet, you can access it while I finish this script. Okay. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business today. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After you conclude remarks, I can invite board members to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Tonight, we are actually not really following exactly this mechanism. I'm going to review our process in just a minute. We will not have public comment, and at this time, I believe we will turn to the Pledge of Allegiance before we begin. So if you would like to join me in standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, I invite you to do so. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dr. Kavanaugh, I wonder if you could please show my slides, my welcome slides. So thank you to everyone. The purpose tonight is to answer some of the many questions that community members have about the proposed reopening learning models. As I mentioned, the models themselves are available in the reopening committee report that is available on the website and through Dr. Kavanaugh's presentation from our last school committee meeting on February 25th. Before we get underway, I really want to say a huge thank you to the panelists who have agreed to join us tonight. You are all the amazing rock stars that make all this happen. We, of course, have the superintendent and assistant superintendent, and we also have all of our building principals, our head nurse, our finance director, director of ESOL, Equity and Access, and a director of student services. And I feel like we're in good hands to get some good answers out to the community. And I just can't thank you enough. I know your days have been endless, and the work you've been doing has been just mountainous. So I really appreciate you taking the time to help inform the community. I also want to give a shout out. Ooh, Dr. Kavanaugh, back please. I also want to give a shout out to EHOP, our Educate Hopkinton. For those of you who don't know EHOP, their mission is to increase government transparency and foster community engagement. Following the public forum that we held in August, I believe, for reopening in the fall, we learned that we could do better in our process. So we reached out to EHOP, who has run forums and conversations before on important topics, and they are working behind the scenes. They helped us plan this forum, and they're helping us to stay on track with time and helping to serve up questions that came from all of you so that we make sure that we're covering all the questions that need to be covered that we can fit in the time allowed. I also want to thank Georgette Wagar, our administrative assistant, who's awesome behind the scenes and running the webinar, practicing the webinars with me today, and working on the Q&A and so forth. So thank you to Georgette and HCAM. I always forget to thank HCAM, and we would be so sunk this entire pandemic without HCAM and your tireless ability to cover all of our meetings. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. Okay, so the process for tonight, we received about 270 questions from the community, teachers, and staff. And we did a pre-submission of questions because in August, we ran into the maximum participation for our public forum. So in order to ensure that everybody had an opportunity to ask questions, we put that form out and we closed the forum a little after noon today, as indicated in the questionnaire. We sorted the questions into 10 topics. We wanted to make sure we covered the breadth of topics that the community is interested in. The topics will be taken one at a time for roughly 10 minutes each. We have about 100 minutes worth of Q&A. Each topic will be moderated by a different school committee member. We've just divided them up. And if you see us looking at a separate monitor, we're working off of a crazy spreadsheet with highlighted questions and so forth. So we'll be reading the questions off of that. EHOP's going to keep time. I'm going to make sure we move on to the next topic at the right time. And there is absolutely no way in 100 minutes, we can get to 270 questions. So we know that we can't cover everything. We will be putting out an FAQ document probably next week, early next week, that will have some documented answers to the questions that were asked during the forum, as well as the ones that we didn't get to. So I ask the community to be patient with the process. We are definitely doing the best we can. There's a lot of material to cover. So panelists, if you may stay with your cameras on throughout, but you can also turn your cameras off if your topic isn't coming up for a while. It's a long meeting, so we understand. That's fine. I just want to invite you to do that if you want. And school committee members, do you have any questions about how we are going to manage? I can't see you, so I'm guessing that's a no. So I'm going to pass off to Dr. Kavanaugh now to open us up, and then we'll move into questions.
Was I open on the last slide? Here we go. All right, thank you, Mrs. Fargiano. I am hoping that the presentation that we open with tonight is able to answer some of the more global questions. I'm sure they'll come up again, but I think it's always helpful to have some kind of a publication so that when this lands on the website, people have something to reference. All right, so the very first question some people have been asking sort of why now? And when the reopening group got together, we really did spend a lot of time thinking about the virus and how many cases we've had in our public schools. I did send something out to the public recently indicating that we've had about 30 adults in our community, about 90 students who are in person and 10 who are remote. So our count right now is about 130 people since September. Our count is among the lowest in the state of Massachusetts, truly, and especially in our Metro West area. So we're always looking at our peers. The CDC's metric indicates that Hopkinton could open for full in-person instruction at physical distancing of 6 feet or more to the greatest extent possible. 3 feet of social distance is supported by research from the Mayo Clinic, supported by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Chan School of Public Health at Harvard University. We reviewed a study of SARS-CoV-2 indicating that 3 feet and 6 feet are not dichotomous, but rather they are constructs largely built on the notion of 1 meter and 2 meters. And according to several credible studies, the risk difference between 3 feet and 6 feet when people are masked and wearing those masks appropriately is negligible. 3 feet is the range for droplets. 6 feet does not really protect a person from aerosols, as aerosols are traveling up to 20 feet. And many of our school districts, surrounding school districts, have successfully reopened since September, really, at 3 feet without transmission of the virus. So if we are thinking that if other schools are able to successfully stay open at 3 feet, we might be able to as well. So that's the answer to why now. Why now we are kind of emerging from the pandemic. I mean, I don't want us to think that our guard should be down, but vaccines are getting to be more widely distributed, and we're thinking that maybe the springtime is the time that we could bring our children back. So what is that going to look like? I'll share the 3 recommended reopening proposals. To start, we'll look at the high school. Hopkinton High School is going to maintain its current schedule of a 7-drop-2 schedule, or 5 periods running each day, and that's a rotating schedule. So the in-person day at Hopkinton High School, the proposed in-person day will run from 7:25 to 11:45. At 11:45, students will be transported home. This additional bus run is going to incur a cost to the district. Students may take a grab-and-go lunch with them if they desire. Students will need to log back into Zoom at 12:45, 1 hour later, and that final period of the day will be taught via Zoom. One positive is that that final period, because it's a rotating schedule, will change every day. So there's not one class that will be taught by Zoom, but rather each class in a day, in a rotation of 7 days, will be taught at the end of the day via Zoom. When we take a look at the middle school students are going to remain in school for the full day from 7:25 to 1:50. The good news for our friends at home is that there will be places for students to sit while they are eating lunch. We had a great big quandary about lunch, but we think we've resolved that. The middle school schedule that we began the year with will be re-implemented. So we had just a few moments where we diverted from that. I think that happened when the state had asked us to do some contact with students on their asynchronous days. There are some classes at the middle school that will grow larger, and in some cases, there may be students who will have teacher changes. And lunch is going to be served in the cafeteria, the gymnasium, and the auditorium, and middle school students will have their own after-school bus run, and that will happen at the regular time. Now, I know we've had several questions that ask about this, and I'm sure that Mr. Keller and Mr. Bishop are going to cover these things again at some point this evening. But I will share some information. The total student count right now at the high school is 1,200 students. We have 1,064 in person and 136 fully remote. If we return full time, there will be 53 classes over 25 students and 4 classes over 30 students. So what's going to need to happen is that some of those classes would need to move to larger spaces. So on average, about 3.4 classes during every period would need to move to a larger space. And those large spaces include the auditorium, the athletic center, the library, and the cafeteria. What we know about classroom size is that about 25 desks will fit into most classrooms. There is a small handful of classrooms that can accommodate 26 desks, and a small handful can accommodate only 18 desks. Classes of over 25 and 30 may be taught in the auditorium. the athletic center, or the cafeteria, the library. So those are all the places where our larger classes might have to be taught if they cannot get into one of those classrooms where you can fit 25 or 26 desks. All right, moving on to the middle school. And this is where I know parents have had many, many questions about schedule changes. So this is important information. So in grade 6, we have 73 students who will have a change in their English language arts teacher. Now, I know that people are wondering, oh my gosh, will my child absolutely positively get a brand new teacher? And this is what people need to know. 10 of those students, yes, indeed, they will have a new ELA teacher, an entirely new ELA teacher for 10 of the 73. 31 will have one of their ELA blocks. So in grade 6, they get a double ELA block. 31 will have one of their ELA blocks with the ELA teacher that they currently have. And in that second one, they are going to have a teacher who is new to them. So they'll be keeping the teacher that they have for one block and getting a new teacher in another block. 32 of those students currently have in the 2 blocks 2 different teachers. What will happen to those 32 is that they will lose one of those teachers and they will have the same teacher for a double block. In grade 7, we had 15 students who originally had Lauren Bailey Jones as a teacher. Recently, those students were moved to Matt O'Connell. They will return to Lauren Bailey Jones. So only 15 students impacted, and they will be going back to a teacher with whom they're familiar. In grade 8, we have 6 students who will be switching from Jordan Church's class to Matt O'Connell's class. And we have 23 students who will be switching from Kristen Marsh's class to Kathy Anasaskis's class. In the middle school, there will be 8 classes that have 30 or more students. All right, and then we can finally look at the recommended proposal for our K-5 schools. That's Hopkins, Elmwood, and Marathon. All 3 buildings will attend full-time and they will keep their regular full school day. The current elementary schedule should remain intact. Current cohort combinations should not require a change in teacher. Lunch is going to be spread from the cafeteria into the gymnasiums to accommodate all of the students so that they can eat at a distance of 6 feet. And our physical education classes will need to be taught outdoors, with the gyms being used for other purposes. On days when there are inclement weather, the PE classes will need to come indoors and probably be a wellness lesson as opposed to a physical education lesson. All right, I know that many parents have asked, what about remote learning? So we are currently waiting to hear from Commissioner Jeffrey Riley regarding regulatory changes for full-time return to school. Jeffrey Riley has previously stated that remote learning programs must remain intact. So if you are a remote parent and you are worried that your remote learning would be dismantled and you really want your child to stay remote, you may stop worrying because remote learning will remain intact. Just to be clear, the district did remind families who chose remote all the way back in January that future model changes would not be feasible. And we are certainly not trying to be difficult, but if we start to take all of our remote kids out of those classes and move them into hybrid spaces, you'll see that the classes I described on the previous slide will just be getting larger and larger and larger. Now, the Commissioner of Education may overrule that. He may say that we have to bring remote kids in who would like to be in. What we might try to do then is to swap students. So if there are currently hybrid families who, when we reduce that social distance in the classroom from 6 feet to 4 feet, they say, that's too much for me, I would prefer to have my child go remote, we might be able to just make 1-for-1 switches. In the event that we make 1-for-1 switches, a hybrid teacher will get a new teacher, the remote teacher, and a remote student will get a new hybrid teacher. So there will be teacher changes for the hybrid and remote if we do that flip-flop. And again, if we are required to readmit remote students, we may actually need to dismantle some remote classrooms, and this will be very challenging. So let's imagine, for example, there are 25 second grade students who say, we don't want to be remote anymore. We wish to go back into school full time. That would mean that we would have to take one of those remote teachers and transition that teacher into being a full-time in-person teacher. So that person would take his or her own students with them who wished to go from remote to hybrid, but any of those other students would have to be sprinkled out across the other remote classrooms. And I understand that that would be very difficult. So at this point in time, we are really waiting on information from Jeffrey Riley. We're going to be looking at the number of kids who may want to make those switches, and we will be looking at each individual grade level's ability to absorb students. And I will just close offering people the key dates and timelines that are upcoming tonight. You can see that we are at the school committee public forum on this topic. Tomorrow, we anticipate that there may be regulatory changes made by the Massachusetts Board of Education and Jeffrey Riley. On March 7th, which is this coming Sunday, the school committee is having a televised working session. Thank you again to HCAM. On March 8th, the custodial staff will begin reopening preparation. On March 9th, there's an impact bargaining session with the Hopkinton Teachers Association. On March 11th, vaccines open for K-12 educational personnel across Massachusetts. Also on March 11th, there's a school committee regular meeting. On March 18th, the school committee regular meeting. On March 29th, that is the date of the tentative K-5 reopening. April 5th is the tentative middle school reopening, and there is no date yet set for a high school reopening. And that is all I have for you, so we should get underway with our questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. We don't have a lot of time for formalities. So before we dive in, I do want to give the community an overview of all the topics so that you know what's coming in the order that it's coming in. We're going to do K-5 learning model first, 6 to 8 learning model, 9 to 12 learning model, remote, risk mitigation, which covers mask wearing, contact tracing, social distancing, etc. Special education, teaching and curriculum delivery, the why now question about what's the rationale for 2021, transportation and budget we combined into one because there weren't as many questions per topic. And then we have an other, which is really largely around some logistics. So those are our topics. We're going to start with K-5, and I'm going to turn it over to Nancy Kavanaugh.
Thank you. So the first question that I have here is, would you be open to considering different models for different grade levels, such as the youngest students who can't read and need more support can get the opportunity to go back full-time if other grades prefer to stay with a hybrid model?
So I'll take that, and then if there's an elementary principal who would like to add to my comments, they certainly can. We started this year actually inviting in students who are on 504, not 504s, I'm sorry, IEPs, and students who are English language learners, because we believed that they needed additional support. And then we brought in other students who needed support along the way. And as you know, there are other districts surrounding us who have sort of phased in bringing kids back. So some of them have K-2 kids in full time. Some of them are working on bringing in their 3 to 5s, their 6 to 8s. But I think our belief is that if we can bring in our students from K to 5, it would be to their advantage to have them come into school and have contact with a teacher every single day. And so because we can do that, I don't necessarily know that there would be a reason to say that we would invite in all of our K-2s, for example, but not our 3 to 5s. So I don't know if the 3 elementary principals would like to add anything to that.
I think you covered it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, then I will go on to the next one. And some of these that were in the K to 5 designated as such actually would apply to other schools as well. So it's not all K to 5. But the next question is, will the COVID-19 vaccine be mandatory for all students, teachers, and administrative staff?
So the Hopkinton Public Schools cannot make that vaccine mandatory for people. Certainly the state government could ask us to do that, but similar to with flu shots, people can seek waivers if they have a medical reason to do so or a religious reason to do so. I mean, certainly we are hoping that people will take advantage of the opportunity to be vaccinated in the state of Massachusetts. It's the way that we grow herd immunity. It's the way that we stop the spread, but that's not something that we can actually mandate that our students or teachers or administrators or staff do.
Thank you. The next question is, will Hopkinton consider appealing a mandate from the state for full in-person learning for grades K to 5?
That's probably a question also for the school committee, but at this point there is, to my knowledge, there is no intent really to appeal a mandate from Jeffrey Riley should there be one tomorrow.
Dr. Kavanaugh, it might be a good time to just explain how the decision is made. I mean, I think the way I understand it, the school committee is responsible for voting on the learning model as educational policy. So that is largely why we have a working session scheduled for Sunday to, discuss all this information that has come forward. So I would think that, this would be under the school committee purview, maybe to talk about, if there's some reason why we go through all of this and feel like K-5 should not be open, it would be a school committee recommendation to submit a waiver. We haven't met as a group. We haven't come to a consensus on this learning model yet. We haven't voted it, but I think that would probably be something that might come from us.
Yes, and when we talk about regulatory change, there are required numbers of hours for secondary students and elementary students. And those were put aside really by regulation when the pandemic hit. So what the commissioner did was he said you could compensate for those hours through asynchronous instruction and all other different models. It seems that he is going to take that back and say that hybrid and remote learning models are no longer accepted as counting toward those hours of required time on learning in Massachusetts.
Thank you. The next question is, how will snack time be managed in the Elmwood classrooms, since the kids will have to take their masks off and the desks will no longer be 6 feet apart? And that, I would think, could apply to other elementary schools perhaps as well.
Shall I take that, Carol?
Absolutely, Mrs. Carver.
Kathy Bain, you provide any updates that you have when I'm finished, but we don't have any plan to have snacks in the classrooms. We haven't had snacks in the classroom up until now, and we don't anticipate that we would do that moving forward. We have a schedule where the students go outside for most of their snack breaks. And on a day with inclement weather, we have a schedule for indoor areas where kids have their snack. So we won't be having snack in the classrooms.
And that's true for Marathon as well. For us, when we are back in the building with a larger group of students, we'll have our snack breaks in the gymnasium. We'll set up a schedule so that they're 6 feet apart, out of the rain or bitter cold, eating their snack.
Same with Hopkins. The locations we currently use will not hold the classrooms that are full size. So we too would be looking to use the gym for snacks when possible, if we couldn't go outside.
Thank you all. The next question I have is, how many children are in one classroom in the K-5 classes?
I can start off. So for kindergarten, our class sizes range, and this would be combining the cohorts that we have now, 18 to 22 for kindergarten, and for first grade, 16 to 21 in a classroom.
At Elmwood School in grades 2, the class sizes range from 19 to 24. And in 3rd grade, they range from 19 to 23. Actually, no, in 3rd grade, we have 24 in 3rd grade. So same, 19 to 24.
Hopkins will all be 20 to 22.
Thank you. The next question I have is, given the latest data about student-to-student and teacher-to-teacher transmission, what makes the district confident that the proposal to reopen with 4 feet of distance and double the number of students each day will not cause more in-school transmission?
So I can start that one, and then I don't know if Kathy Bain you want to add, or if anybody who had been on the transmission of the virus working group. But one of the things that we had learned is that while there can be aerosol spread, COVID-19 is predominantly spread through droplets, and typically that space around a person, that 3-foot space, is where those droplets will land. We do know of, as I said earlier, we do know of other districts that have had their doors open successfully at 3 feet for a very long time. So we are offering 4 feet of social distance in the classroom. It was really interesting. We went to the Elmwood School yesterday and saw a set of classroom. The custodian in the Elmwood School did a very neat thing. He's got a 4-foot wooden dowel so that we can just go and measure between each one. I mean, it's just a matter of like touching that dowel to desks, and you see that they are all in fact 4 feet apart. Certainly we are still going to have students who are COVID positive, and we'll still have students who have a north, south, east, and west close contact. And when we say that, we mean the children who are sitting in front of, behind of, to the left, and to the right. Sometimes there is no right, so there are only 3 close contacts. Sometimes the students in the back corner, there are only 2 close contacts. But again, that number shouldn't change, because even if we are 4 feet apart, when we branch out again, we're now at 8 feet. So we wouldn't be going beyond on those 6 feet. So what we are really hoping is that when we reduce our number to from 6 feet to 4, that we don't really see an increase in school transmission. And as we all know, we've only had 1 student-to-student in school transmission to date, documented to date, approved really by the public health officials. So I feel like a 6, we're always trying to mitigate risk, but we think that the risk in going from 6 feet to 4 is negligible, really, as long as both parties are wearing masks and wearing them appropriately.
And I can just echo that and to add that I think it's going to be important to be wearing masks correctly, still doing hand sanitizing, all the things that we're currently doing, and carefully monitoring data, contact tracing, and other opportunities that are available to us to monitor what's going on district-wide will all be important.
That's great. Thank you. I'm gonna, we are out of time for this particular group of questions, so I'm gonna move on to the next group, the 6 to 8, with Meg.
Great, thank you, Nancy, and thank you to our impresario, Amanda. The first question we have for middle school: will students who are doing hybrid but opt to return to full-time in person remain with the teachers they currently have?
We're handing that right to Mr. Keller.
Well, as you heard from Dr. Kavanaugh's opening comments, the goal certainly is to do so. However, there are going to be several situations at each grade level where we're unable to do that. And of course, I think it's important to say this is looking at the students that we currently have in our hybrid model. That all may change depending on students if they opt to go to remote and the kinds of changes that will take place there. But we have minimized as much as possible the number of teacher changes, because that's we think that is certainly important at this time of year. But there are going to be a number of changes. As Dr. Kavanaugh said earlier, there's going to be 73 students who will have a different teacher or be modifying who their teacher is at grade 6. We've got 15 students who are remote that had a teacher at the beginning of the year and then switched because of a remote change that will be switching back to that original teacher. And then at grade 8, we'll have a change in math teachers for 23 students switching to a different math teacher and 6 students switching to a different science teacher. And it's a middle school schedule is a complicated thing, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of questions as to why that kind of change would exist. But the number of classes and sections and levels that we have and languages makes things extremely complicated. So as much as we would love to have classes that could just come together, we weren't able to do that in the summer planning for this. So that's why we're in this kind of situation. But for the most part, we'll be able to do that. But there are definitely a good number, as I mentioned earlier, that will have different teachers.
Thank you. How many students will be in each classroom?
So that too is going to range. Our smallest cohort size, as we bring cohorts together, will be a class of 10, and our largest one will be a class of 35. And again, that goes back to the complications with our schedule, with math leveling and with languages and kids taking different languages. So it's a real varied experience in those classes. But like we've been doing all year long, we will continue to have a model where students stay in a cohort. So they'll be in a cohort. Teachers will be rotating from classroom to classroom. So in some cases, a student might be in a class of 24 for, let's say, English and social studies. And then because of math leveling, if they're in a 7th or 8th grade class, some students might come into the class or some students might go out. But for the most part, students are going to be in the same classroom all day long.
Okay, thank you.
Do you mind if I add something in? I just wanted to add to Alan's answer about sixth grade ELA, and it might be important to note that our ELA teachers have worked very closely at the grade 6 level, both in terms of being partners and collaborative educators, and working with our ELA director as well. So while there do seem to be some potential shifts at grade 6 ELA, there's incredible attention to curricular consistency at that grade level.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add on to that as well, Jen, because I think I want the final word. But just kidding. So I did say 73 students, but it's important to note that there are 2 teachers on each team. And so only 10 of those 73 will be going to an entirely new teacher for them. So it's just a matter of many of those students who had 2 ELA teachers, one during a reading block and one during a writing block, will now have one teacher for both the reading and the writing block. And the reason why that is, ultimately it came down to a choice between having students switch ELA teachers or having them double up on a related arts class. So if we didn't do this, students would have had, say, digital media for two mini semesters, mini terms, excuse me.
All right, and this next question I think is really addressed to everyone. If the students go back full time, will the MCAS be administered? And if so, do you envision a significant chunk of the remainder of the school year to be focused on test prep?
Well, we'll give that one to start. Is it okay if Mrs. Parson starts with this one? Since she's the MCAS queen.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'd be happy to start that one off. So, the short answer is yes, students will be expected to take the MCAS. We've had multiple communications from the Department of Education, and as many of you may know, the purpose of the MCAS at this point is mainly for us to get a sense of where our students are and how some of the standards have been met. And that's at the 3 to 8 level, and certainly at the high school level, we know that MCAS remains as a graduation requirement. It also remains as a piece of a statewide scholarship that is offered to our students who achieve specific scores on the MCAS at the high school level. So what the Department of Education has done is they have reduced in grades 3 through 8 the amount and volume of testing that our students will experience when they come back in and take the MCAS. We're not so fortunate at the high school level. They're still going to have basically the same amount. It's 2 sessions of ELA, 2 sessions of math. So I think, as I'd said to Dr. Kavanaugh earlier today, we will certainly have a lot of testing when we come back. There's no doubt about that. But when I say there'll be a lot of testing, that's district-wide. Each individual student at the elementary level will see 2 sessions, one of ELA and one in math, and that's all the way through grade 8. So we certainly will have testing going on, but the Department of Ed has done, I think, the best they can to minimize the amount of time students will be testing instead of having access to new instruction.
And I just wanted to add on too, because I get my back up a little bit about that. I don't think that we ever do test prep. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on, I think probably certainly district-wide, is that we work on the content and the skills, and our students do really well on MCAS as a result, as opposed to doing test prep.
Thank you, Ellen. That was a really good point.
So the next question is one that Dr. Kavanaugh touched upon in her presentation. Will 6th graders be eating on the floors for lunch? So it might just be worth repeating that that's not going to be the case.
That is not going to be the case. I think somewhere in the midst of trying to figure out how to feed middle school children at school, Mr. Keller came up with the brilliant idea that we could violate the no eating in the auditorium rule. And so if we can get about 90 kids into that room, we will not have to have children sitting on beach towels and eating lunch every day for, however many minutes. And Alan, if you want to talk a little bit more about what lunch will look like, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's lunch is actually going to look really similar to what it does right now in terms of a 20 to 25 minute period. We're currently using our gymnasium, the Brown gym, and the cafeteria. where our assistant principals, Mrs. Benbenek and Mr. Ocampo, and our campus aide, Mrs. Chatton, are monitoring, and every once in a while I go down there, but it's not that often, are monitoring our students and our cafeteria staff and everybody kind of pitching in. So they're currently on desks. We're going to need those desks back in the classroom. So we've been working with Mr. Person to identify different tables that we have around the classroom, folding chairs, and different things that we're going to utilize in those spaces in order to make that work. So it's not going to be all that pretty, but it won't be eating on the floor or on beach towels.
That's great. We had a question which I think has already been answered too. Will remote students be going back to school full time? And we don't know yet, correct?
Correct.
I think that sums it up for these middle school questions. So on to high school.
Okay. On the high school side, we had a lot of questions about schedule impacts, which I think have been answered, but some other schedule space ones are still open. So we have a question on how will construction at the high school constrain ability to have all the students back, and kind of related in general, how will class size be impacted by the return? And again, tons of questions about will schedules be impacted. So if someone could answer and address all that together, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. At the high school, we're unique to have our construction project going on. And I know Mr. Person can talk a little bit about it as well. Right now, we have, if you've been in the high school, we have 3 kind of main stairways where kids will go from the different floors. In this whole year, we've been operating with 2 staircases because one is blocked off for the construction. So with half the amount of students, we've been able to manage. And I think bringing all the students back into the school, or at least over 1,000 students back on a daily basis, we have to be really creative about how we're going to navigate the hallways. At the high school, students go from room to room. They don't stay in the same room like in other buildings. So there is traffic in the hallway. We do stagger the dismissals from class to class. So our plan is to do that as well, but we might have to have staircases kind of be one-way staircases and have kind of one-way traffic almost in certain hallways for students. They'll get to get used to it. It'll take some time. So it's not an ideal situation. We were certainly hoping for the construction to be done, but unfortunately that's not the case. And in the case of an evacuation or an emergency, we do have the most amount of classrooms on the 3rd floor. So we have been told that we could use that middle staircase that's kind of blocked off now in case of an emergency if we need it. So that's good to know in terms of an evacuation. So yes, it certainly adds a different element and a challenging element with bringing all the students back, having a kind of portion of the school blocked off, certainly. In terms of class sizes at the high school, we're going to go from a 14-day schedule, which is a green and orange cohort, down to a 7-day schedule. So we're bringing together the green and orange cohorts. So the class sizes will get bigger. I think Dr. Kavanaugh mentioned we have about 53 classes, individual classes that have over 25 students, 4 of which have over 30 students. Our classes range, though. We have some smaller classes around 10 to a dozen students. In our largest class, the last I looked, was around 33 students. And each grade level is tough because we do have a lot of combined classes, but I would say the average is around 20 students for 9th grade classes, around 20 for 10th grade, 19 students for 11th grade, and 23 for the 12th grade. I think we all know the 12th grade is the biggest class we have at the high school. So in terms of those numbers, yes, they'll just be combining. Like Joe, if you had Algebra 1 period 2 in orange and I had Algebra 1 period 2 in green, we just come together for the first time. So the classes will be bigger, certainly. We can fit 25 desks in a standard classroom, 4 feet apart. But then there are few classes that can fit up to 26 and many classes that are more like 18 to 21. So we will have to be very creative with our schedule and where classes will be taught.
Okay, great. Alan, related to that, I guess another set of questions are about lunch, and was there any consideration given to other solutions for lunch, for example, outdoor tents, or at an extra lunch period so that high school students don't have to go home for the last period?
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation around lunch. I know that there was a subgroup around lunch in our reopening committee. Our department heads talk about lunch. I talk about that in school council. So it's certainly a conversation that we've been trying to come up with a solution, but it's challenging at the high school. I think we've mentioned that we have about 3 to 4 classes per period. We have 7 periods in our schedule that'll have to be taught in the auditorium, the cafeteria, the athletic center. So there's going to be multiple classes in our athletic center, which is where we have lunch now. So we'll be removing the chairs for the desks out of the athletic center. And so that's going to be more of a class space for our wellness classes and any classes over 25. And then when you look at our cafeteria space at 6 feet apart with masks off, we can fit about 83 students in the cafeteria. And with over about 1,064 students coming in every day, you can do the math. That's quite a few lunch periods. And then we're starting to cut into instructional time and how we're going to actually have a schedule with 7 to 8 different lunch periods. And I'm in communication with other area principals. I meet once a month, and many high schools are starting this process of reopening. And lunch is probably one of the biggest challenges that we all face. And many are doing this grab and go remote period at the end of the day. So yes, we would love to have the students here and figure out a way to do it. It's just really challenging.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question about the surveys that went out. Can you remind us, in the original survey, I think it was February 5th, about reopening, and I know these were for operational gauging, not a vote, but the question is, in that original survey, how many high school parents were in favor of returning to school full-time in person in the spring versus the fall? And was it different at the high school than the middle school?
So having seen this question earlier today, I did go back and look at the survey, and we asked all parents about the return in the fall, and 87% of parents said that they were anticipating a return in the fall, while 13% said that they were not. But I think that when we asked about the spring return, we asked that question of elementary, and 78% said they would prefer to return this spring at the elementary level, and 22% said no. At the middle school level, 74% said that they would prefer to return this spring, and 26% said no. And at the high school level, it was down to 72% of high school parents who said that they would be willing to return this spring, and 28% said they did not like the idea of returning this spring.
Okay, great, thank you. A couple more questions. One is related to students who are identified as close contacts and need to quarantine. What is the plan to ensure that they're able to access curriculum during quarantine? I guess the question might be, how has that been handled to date, and how will it be handled under this proposal?
So what I can say about that is I believe that as part of Jeffrey Riley's regulations, he is going to stipulate that in the event that a student has to quarantine because of an in-school contact, we are required to ensure that that student has some kind of contact person at the school for the days when that child is at home. And I'm going to actually turn to our head nurse, Kathy Bain, right now, because I think I would love for parents to hear about the quarantine period. So imagining that, I have a close contact today in school, what happens to me?
Sure. So let's say that I'm in close contact with someone who's has tested positive. I'm going to be tested day 5 from my last contact with this person. I'm going to be home quarantine for my family as well. I'm going to get my test done on day 5. While I'm waiting for my test, I'm still going to be at home quarantining. I'm going to let someone know if I become symptomatic. Hopefully I'm not symptomatic, but if I am, that's something that I report. On day 7 would be my last day of quarantine if my test is negative. And then I would be able to return to, active kind of things on day 8. But I would need to continue. Like, quarantine doesn't really end. It still is always going to be 14 days, but you have that ability to return to your activities while still monitoring your signs, symptoms for the remainder of the time until you reach that 14th day.
So pretty much worst case scenario, a student would miss school for 5 days.
8.
But we could have to calculate in a weekend.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right.
And again, you mentioned earlier, but can you say again, do you anticipate there being a greater number of close contacts with increased population in the school? Say,
So that's a very tricky question. And, we really don't have a crystal ball to say that. But given, I think, what we know about wearing masks and wearing them appropriately and 4 feet of social distance in the classroom, I think that we just have to make sure that our kids are washing their hands and wearing their masks. And, as Mr. Bishop described at the high school, if we have kids who are, and, I will certainly let you talk about this, but the times when they are leaving classrooms and the pathways that they'll be taking through school and sort of the expeditious way that they're leaving one room and getting to another room, as long as there isn't that kind of stop and chit chat and mask off behavior, I can't imagine what would change. But I could be wrong because we don't have a crystal ball to know what it's going to look like when we have double the students.
all right, thank you. I think that's, was there another comment?
I was just going to say, that's why I think it's important to be collecting data and looking at cases and all the things that go into that statistical piece as well, to sort of look where we always are.
Yes, and hats off to our nurses because they have done an amazing job of collecting data. Sometimes they will share with me spreadsheets and I just close them because they're so daunting. I will frequently say, I don't know that I can even read all of the quarantining and all of that information that they have been storing since September.
I think that wraps it up for the high school questions. I'll hand it over now to Leah for questions on remote model.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let me get right to it. First question, should remote students be also given an opportunity to return to school full time? Is there a reason why preference is given to hybrid students, but not the remote students?
So, and I think I covered this just a little bit in my opening remarks. When we got to January and we had sort of situated classrooms, the difficulty when you take a student if you take a single student out of a remote classroom, the likelihood of us being able to absorb that student is very high. It shouldn't be a problem. But when you start to take 3 children or 5 children or 10 children or 15 kids, then it gets very difficult to sprinkle them throughout a schedule in any one of our buildings, and those classrooms get way too big. You heard from our elementary principals tonight that, so Mrs. Carver, for example, has classes that are already at 24 and some that are at 19. How many kids could she possibly absorb from the remote world before she can't fit the right number of desks at 4 feet anymore in classrooms? So really, it's about distancing and it's about capacity. It's certainly not about making a hard and fast decision to eliminate some of our learners. We are really still kind of fiddling with that information and we don't really know the answers yet.
Thank you. How will the remote students be impacted by these proposed changes in regards to teachers and scheduling? I think one of the big questions that I see is like teacher assignments and the schedules in general.
So I'll let the principals answer those questions because they know those schedules way better than any of the rest of us.
Sure, I'm happy to start. For any high school remote student, they'll be continuing to have their same teachers that they have at the high school. The difference with the model going back full time is right now our remote students have their synchronous face-to-face instruction on green days and have more asynchronous time on orange days. So going to this full-time model, they would be having face-to-face time with their teachers every day, which I think is a good thing, but it's also a lot of screen time. And so we had a conversation with our staff at our last meeting, those who teach 5 remote classes or those who teach 1, to be considerate of that and think about the time that the students are on Zoom for the entire day and might try to build in some more break time for those students since there's going to be more screen time.
Yeah, I would add at the middle school level, I don't foresee any changes. I think that we've consistently heard what a tremendous job that our teachers who are just figuring this out in remote land have been doing for students that are home and they're seeing their teachers every single day. And we've worked out a schedule that accommodates that. So I don't foresee any changes. Having said that, with the potential changes that Dr. Kavanaugh mentioned in terms of changing tracks, that certainly could have an impact on teachers. scheduling.
And for the elementary, I think I can speak for all of us where the change would be if the commissioner says that all students are invited in, then we would have to look at who's teaching those classes. But with our plan moving forward with our hybrid students coming back and our remote students stay as they chose in January, we would not have any changes.
And in terms of the schedule, I would not anticipate changing. We've worked really hard with our remote teachers. They've done an amazing job of creating schedules that work developmentally for each of the age groups with breakout rooms and what seems to maximize learning. So I don't anticipate us changing from that for families that stay in the remote, if that's what happens.
I don't anticipate any changes either. We'd continue to go the way that we're going. There might be tiny tweaks to support teachers who come in and support either a math tutor or the reading tutor. There might be some small changes to some of that support. Once we bring everybody back together, because a great deal of support is being provided on days that students are home. And if everyone's together, we won't be permitted to do it that way, but we're working on that now.
Thank you very much. Will there be options to stay remote due to health reasons? I assume since we're allowing people to stay remote that they're still allowed to stay remote, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, if you're remote, you can stay remote. And the commissioner has said people need to keep their remote programs intact.
Okay. Will fully remote students, and once again, I think this was briefly mentioned, but just to clarify, will they be expected to sit on Zoom for 6 hours every day to attend their classes if we follow the fully remote schedule?
So I think really that question is something that Mr. Bishop has already answered.
Yeah, I think so too.
And that was what I was referring to, that the remote schedules would stay the same. Oh, pretty much.
So I'm going to go to a question I hadn't highlighted, which is, what are, I think we also discussed this, but what are the implications to remote schedules and teacher assignments in Hopkins and HMS? I think this is more about keeping your current teachers, or will teachers change?
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's all right. It's really up in the air. It all depends on what we learn in terms of options for students potentially remote coming into the building and vice versa. So all that is kind of up in the air at this point, depending on how much change there is. But at this particular moment, we would want students that are currently in remote to be able to maintain the teachers that they currently have.
Same here.
Okay, and a question about the survey. Why were remote learning families excluded from the previous survey? How will you ensure that remote classes will not grow as a result of the proposed option of full-time or remote?
So I think one of the reasons that we weren't asking the remote families questions on the surveys that we really didn't have one. We were leaving the remote classrooms intact, and our building principals are pretty much saying that the teachers will remain the same. And I understand that this asker is wondering if the hybrid kids want to go remote, will those classes get very large? And I think we will try to safeguard the sizes of those classes just as well as we are doing for the kids who used to be hybrid and who would now be in person. And I don't know if there's anything I've missed, building principals, on that one.
Okay. And I think that covers most of the remote questions. Thank you very much. We will go to risk mitigation and Amanda.
Okay. Thanks, Leah. I guess I just want to follow up, if I could, with Nurse Kathy Bain about you made a comment just earlier before we get into the other questions about the data, the importance of data for monitoring the school. Do you have any sense of what that data is? Is it monitoring our own cases, or is there other data that you're talking about?
So our focus is on Hopkinton data for our day-to-day practice. That's not to say that we don't look at data, sort of across the Commonwealth or in districts that are near us, or in my nurse leader working group, it might be something that we discuss, but our focus is predominantly on what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, because that impacts how we function, if you will, throughout the day. As Carol said, we do live by a spreadsheet because there's so much to know about each particular student and case, and from this algorithm for dates for return to every note that we keep to, it's important to have all that information. And I think that having the more information we have brings to the table discussions about being in school, being out of school, all the things that impact learning in our days. And when we are in school, what else can we do to encourage that safety piece?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what happens in a full-time situation if cases, school or community, increase significantly? Would we go back to hybrid or go remote for a period of time?
All right, so that is a very tricky question. I think in terms of logistics, you could probably say, all right, so here are all the people who come to school full-time every day in person, and we're going to transition those classrooms to remote for X number of days, right? And I think you could do that just for a single classroom. I think you could do it for a building. But there's a new kind of wrench in the works with this one. And the problem is that if the Commissioner of Education changes that time on learning model, what he would essentially be saying is that remote day doesn't count. And so what then happens is you may just have to close the school and add another day to the school year. What we have heard could happen, and there's no verification of this, is that when you close your school for a day, and if you're not able to make that up at the end of the year, the way that they would compensate for it, or I should say penalize you, is by taking a portion of your Chapter 70 money. So we have to be very cautious now about the way we kind of label our days and label learning and closing schools and all of that. But we will learn more about that in the coming days, because when the regulations change, we should be learning more about that answer.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. I was expecting all that. Okay. Given that many more kids will be in our schools and those kids will be in much closer proximity to each other, how will the schools handle the increased need for contact tracing once the majority of students return to school? So do we have, I guess the question is, do we have adequate staffing and capacity to add contact tracing?
I'm going to have Kathy Bain take that question.
Not knowing if we will have an increase, I can say that, contact tracing is a multi-step process that involves not only a focus from the school nurses, because right now we're functioning like in a few roles, right, as full-time school nurses and supporting the COVID management pieces within the district, as well as supporting, collaborating and communicating, which we are very strong communicators, all the time to case manage within a school district, correct? So in terms of if we had more cases, do we have the staff to contact trace? I think that's going to depend on things. I can tell you now, if a student or a staff member is positive, during the day, that's one thing that we'll kind of all jump on and support each kind of group leadership meeting when we have one for the beginning of what is a process of contact tracing and case managing. When it's in after school hours or 8:30 at night, you're into it for at least 2 hours, right, to contact trace, just so that the people that need to know before the next morning. I can tell you now, we already work part of each weekend. It's unlikely that we haven't worked part of a weekend during case management, and that's a lot of follow-up as well for months. I think that there's certainly a lot of support and guidance that comes from public health as well as Mass Department of Public Health that would feed into any kind of increased numbers that we have. So I guess what I'm going to say is I would hope that we wouldn't have increased numbers. If we do, as nurse leader and with the leadership team, we'll work to make sure that those resources that we have, if they need to be built on, we will. And working together as a very strong group of 6 definitely makes for sort of sharing of that responsibility. But I also, as a nurse leader, need to be thoughtful of the equity piece of that, right? If there's more cases at one building, how do I divide that out so that we're all kind of supporting that piece equally? It's definitely complex.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And when she talks about follow-up, I will say that in terms of sort of case management, they give lovely family care. They are constantly reaching out to our families.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Is the school district resuming all spring sports? What safety precautions will the district pursue for team sports, including, for instance, a high contact sport such as wrestling?
So we are doing spring sports. We will follow all MIA guidelines, but I'm going to let Mr. Bishop talk a little bit about what those look like because he is the expert.
Yeah, so it's the MIA comes out with different guidelines and modifications per sports. There's a lot of different committees for the different sports. We obviously follow the different guidelines that they put out. We also adhere to the EEA guidelines. The Tri-Valley League principals and athletic directors get together at the beginning of every season to talk about different aspects of the season, concerns that everybody has. We talk about fan policies. So we do everything we can to offer the opportunities for students to participate in a safe way. And so right now the hope is to be able to offer all of the spring sports, wrestling included, although we have not got the EEA guidelines for wrestling. That's a little bit more complicated, but our fingers are crossed and we're hoping for the best. So that spring season might have quite a few sports happening, even more than we typically do, and about 500 plus athletes. So, we are working daily. Mr. Cormier does a fantastic job communicating with families, communicating with the athletes and the coaches, and making sure everyone knows the expectations. And right now, the plan is to move forward with spring sports.
Thank you.
I'd also add, just if anybody's interested, and I won't take up the time now, but there are also new guidelines for return to sports after you've had COVID. And that's something that Evan and his team and Alan and the athletic director and the nurses have been working on as well. So just something, if you're interested in sort of another element to add to management, would be interesting.
Thank you, Kathy. Yep, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. What additional safety protocols do you anticipate adding to our reopening protocols during the 2 weeks after April vacation to mitigate any increased risk to variants of COVID, since more people will be potentially traveling throughout the state, out of state, into other countries during the week of vacation?
So I'm not sure that we have sort of additional safety protocols that we would be adding. I understand that there are new variants and, we are constantly, again, telling kids, wash your hands, wear your masks, and all of those things. So, we are hoping that things go well this spring when we have more students in our building and students sitting closer together in our classroom. But I can't honestly tell you that there will be things that we are adding because I feel like we have mitigated risk in about as many ways as we possibly can. And I don't know, Kathy, if you have other ideas to add to this question.
I think I'm always looking at things from the nurse lens. I think having that conversation with families before of where they're traveling and when can help us best support what needs to happen when they come back to meet the advisory, excuse me, requirements for testing. And having that conversation before school reopens kind of thing is really helpful to us. And oftentimes parents will reach out and email or call weeks before and say, theoretically, if I was going away, what would So I think familiarizing themselves with travel advisories, connecting with the school nurse is helpful. And it just brings a little bit of less anxiousness for the nurses as well, because I have to tell you, at the end of a school vacation week, although you want to have that downtime and you want to enjoy, I have to tell you, for us it's a heightened time because we're just thinking about, will we have everything in place for return when we come back, and that's important to us.
Thank you. Dr. Kevin, I wonder if you can talk, recent news about teacher vaccinations, but could you update anyone who's unaware of the new sort of timeline and news that has come out this week about the timeline of availability? There were lots of questions about teacher vaccinations and when they'd be available. And I know we don't control vaccinations, but there have been some updates.
Sure. So it was announced yesterday that teacher vaccinations would begin as part of phase 2, tier 3, exclusively teachers on March 11th. And so that's really great news. We know that we have some people among us who have already been vaccinated, people with comorbidities or people who have athletic trainer licenses or OT/PT speech, BCBAs. Those folks have already been sort of able to go and get a vaccine in tier 1. So we are excited about that. Along the way, we have been trying very, very hard to ensure that our teachers could be vaccinated. Early on, we believed that we were going to be able to get vaccines through our local Board of Health. And certainly to no one's fault, the vaccines didn't come into local places, but rather they made decisions to send them to some of the great big venues like Gillette and Fenway and the Natick Mall and those kinds of places. So we did, in fact, try then to think about how to get more people on board so that maybe we could be a vaccination site. And I asked Chief Slayman if he could reach out to the Westboro Fire Department and see if we could do something collaborative. That didn't quite pan out. We had called the local CVS because they do our flu clinic. That didn't quite pan out. We've worked very closely with Pooja and Karen Spilka's office, Carolyn Dykema, to put some pressure on our legislators. And I think that has actually moved the needle a little bit and may have gotten us a little bit closer. But at any rate, I am very happy that teachers are now going to start to have access to a vaccine. That said, it's regrettable. I think that the reopening timeline has kind of outpaced the availability of the vaccine. And so we just kind of are where we are. And I am hoping that as many educators can get their vaccine as quickly as possible. It's really important. It's really important. I think you're muted, Amanda.
We gave a little extra time to risk management because there were just so many questions on this topic. So did the reopening committee consider the increasing presence of new, more contagious variants of the virus, particularly B117, which has spiked among school-aged children in Israel and Italy and is now gaining a foothold in the US when making its recommendations?
We did, and we addressed that topic in the formal report. One of the things that we learned in that group is that what viruses do is mutate. And so, we're going to have to anticipate that happening over, time forever. One of the things that we learned, every time there's another, flu vaccine each year, what they do is they look at, all of the variants of the flu across North America, and then whatever kind of sort of cocktail they put together for a flu vaccine that year is best designed to meet the needs of what's out there in terms of the flu virus. So we do know that they are out there, and we do know that they can be, variants that spread more quickly, that are more contagious. We have been hearing that the vaccines are working against them. And I think that the only thing that we can do at this point is maybe really watch carefully the trajectory of those variants.
Okay, thank you. Our time is up. So I am going to pass on to Meg for special education.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. So there are a lot of questions about what is going to happen to the IEP students who attend 5 days a week when everybody returns to school. How will that affect them?
Thank you. So students who are on IEPs, the service delivery will not be impacted. So what I mean by that is every student, as you know, is entitled to receive the services as written, and that will certainly continue. I think we're looking at two things in terms of student return and the impact on special education, and that is at the high school level, as you know, because of the dismissal time, students will be going home. So depending on the 7-day cycle, there's a possibility that some students within that cycle may receive services remotely. So that is definitely one change that will take place, but the services will still continue. It's just going to be remote. The second piece is the class size. So as you heard the principals talk about the class size. So with all students returning, class sizes are going to look differently. And in my conversations in working on this with the principals, they're diligently working on the schedules to manage that and to manage the impact of that, especially for special needs students. What I will say is students that are in intensive classes with high needs at the high school will be able to still stay on site every day. And I know that was a concern of families. So I just want to reiterate that is still an opportunity. So for the neediest learners, they can still stay on site.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is a related question. If a student's IEP states that he is supposed to be in a classroom with a limited number of students to best serve his needs, what's going to happen if their class is with 30 or more students?
So obviously this is a case-by-case situation. If by limited number, we talk limited class number of students, I would have to assess whether or not we're talking about a student in the intensive classroom. If that's the case, then that is not going to change. We would definitely protect and preserve those classrooms to make sure that they are maintaining small class sizes in accordance with their IEP. If the concern is for a moderate student in a larger class where it's clearly outlined in the IEP that there may be some difficulty with a larger class size, then we are going to have to analyze that. And I am going to have to work directly into a class where there may be a lower number of students. So as you heard at the elementary levels, their ranges vary. And even at the middle school, the ranges vary from 10 to 30. Worst case scenario, if in fact a student couldn't be moved and the class size was going to be 30 and it was definitely going to be impactful, my recommendation would be for the parent to work directly in partnership with the team so we can come to a team meeting to determine what next steps need to be taken, because we need to be able to support families in that.
Okay, thank you very much. What steps will the schools take to make sure that the cohorts do not exceed the percentage of students on IEPs?
So, and I don't know if principals want to jump in, but as I stated, the principals are looking right now at their class configurations, being mindful of the IEPs, and they're doing their very best to ensure that the numbers are not too high. But again, in certain circumstances, that may be unavoidable. What I will say also is the regulation is a little tricky in terms of percentages and class sizes. And if in fact we find that we have a classroom that is over 50% special education, for instance, at that point, I would be seeking guidance from our State Department of Education. I work directly with Russell Johnston, the Senior Associate Commissioner. He is working with special education directors across the state. He has scheduled a meeting for us at the end of this month, and I'm sure it's to talk about some of these items. We also have an opportunity to petition the Department of Education for a waiver if necessary. So I will need definitely more guidance on that if that is the case. I'm hoping it's not. Like I said, I know that the principals are working very, very hard to ensure special needs students, especially those who are in smaller classes, maintain that opportunity to learn. But if that doesn't happen, then certainly we'll look at next step options, both for families and students. So I want to reiterate, it's not just procedural, me working with DESE. It's for students and families coming to the IEP team if there are concerns regarding the impact on learning. And then the second piece is the procedural, with me working with the Department of Education.
Okay, thank you very much, because there's quite a bit of concern about how difficult those transitions could be for IEP students who might have to have a new teacher or shift to a new room. Understandable concern. And finally, what are the mental health supports that are going to be in place for our students once we do all return and the changes are many that they're facing every day? And the teachers are facing many changes every day. So what will we be able to do to support people during this time of intense transition?
So intense is a good word. And I've been working across the district to look at the continuum of services in mental health. So when the pandemic hit, in addition to planning in the budget for additional supports around school adjustment, I know we're adding school adjustment at the elementary level. That's a proposal, as well as behavior support in the budget. But apart from that, I had written into the grant over the summer consultancy support around programmatic shifts and what type of tiered system of mental health support we can offer. So what I mean by that is we have bright consultants who've been working with our district from Brookline to help us build programs over the past few years. Well, they're continuing that work. However, this year, they're very focused on programmatically what we are going to offer these students because of this situation. At the secondary level, not only are we working on programmatically what we're doing to offer students in this situation, we've also partnered up with psychiatry support as a dual effort to assess the mental health interventions, our tiered system of support, and then the most immediate need. And I've been meeting with counselors across the district this year, and as most recently had meetings this week even with them about this. And there is definite an urgency. Clinicians are worried, and they're worried for staff, they're worried for the students, and they want to make sure that we're doing our very best to support everybody. So that being said, depending on the grade level, we have a plan at each grade level to assess that. At the elementary level, we're analyzing staffing and structures. At the secondary level, we're doing the same. We're analyzing staffing and structures. For instance, I met with Lee Greco, the director of guidance today up at the high school, and she's going to a department meeting to analyze exactly this need and what steps we need to take with our existing staffing, as well as if there's additional supports needed to address that immediate need upon student return. And then above and beyond that, we're looking at programmatic concerns. And we're doing the same at the middle school. We're having just multiple conversations. Monthly, I'm meeting with folks on my calendar about this, and we are definitely addressing it. And we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we are meeting the needs of these students and the staff as well with their support, who are working, by the way, tirelessly right now. Even without the students returning, the staff are doing everything they can to support the kiddos that are at home and struggling, the kiddos that we know are coming back, students that we currently have on site that have needs, off-site that have needs, and out-of-district placements. I mean, the team is doing a fantastic job, and they will continue to do so. And we're doing everything we can at the building and district level to support them.
Thank you so much for that reassurance, because I know parents and teachers are very worried about the mental health of the students as well as their own mental health. I think we're all suffering from collective trauma right now.
Yep.
And just need to be as kind as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Mayor, you all set with your questions?
Yes.
I just wanted, before I jumped in, I think that brings that to me, right, for the questions regarding teaching. So the first question I have, and some of the questions in this category have been answered previously. Some I thought could use a little bit more expanding because they're asked for a slightly different angle. So some of them, I'll go ahead and start. With bodies closer together in classrooms, will more students need to quarantine if there's a positive case in that classroom? Will remote learning opportunities be available to students if required to quarantine, or will they be on their own to follow syllabus assignments?
Yeah. So I guess I can start to answer about whether or not students will be left alone. What we have heard is that the commissioner is going to require that when students are quarantined, that they have some liaison, some person to help them kind of navigate the learning while they are at home and their peers are still at school.
Thank you. The next question, do you see a full return to in-school learning this spring impacting the 2021 to 2022 learning program? Will there be money available to pay curriculum and grade level leaders to work on curriculum this summer to address the lost learning and identify the best path forward for the 2021 and 2022 school year?
Oh, I think that's a Mrs. Parson question.
Sure. So I think the community can be assured that we are looking at all angles of the curriculum. And that's work that's been ongoing this year, led by some of our directors, our ELA director, Deb Moriarty, Jen Suker, working with our English learners and ensuring that they're accessing the curriculum, and certainly our principals and assistant principals and subject matter leaders and curriculum leaders. There's not a day that goes by that we're not thinking about curriculum and how it's that we have for our students. We've added some tutoring in at 3 of our schools for students that appear to be below benchmark and presented with some concerns. So we are using some of our federal grant money to support students at this very time. We've also begun the process of applying for grants through the Department of Education to bring more money into the district to support summer learning programs as well. That obviously is in process at this time, and more information will come out as we know more. One thing that I do think is really important to share with our families, and things that I'm hearing our teachers sharing, and I actually truly believe this, is when people talk about the learning loss, we're not seeing the loss of a year in terms of our students, and much of our data is helping us to see exactly where our students are. I hear teachers talking about the fact that some of the things we pride ourselves on in this district are the extras, the extra enrichment, the extra activities and opportunities. And because of the limited in-person time that we have had, we are missing out on some of those additional opportunities that really make learning enjoyable and bring kids back each day. And what I'm also hearing our teachers saying is that we are sticking with our standards, we're sticking with the curriculum, we're sticking with the topics that we know are critically important for students at each grade level and in each content area. So when we talk about learning loss, yes, there are some activities and things that we haven't had the chance to fully explore the way we typically would have. And that's not to dismiss that. We are missing that for sure, and our students are missing that. But in terms of making sure we're looking at the standards, we're looking at students' understanding and mastery of the standards at hand, we are moving right along, and our teachers are really doing a great job with that.
Yeah, and I think Mrs. Carver, this morning we had a meeting and you shared a story of, the kind of resilience you see when you bring a student back into the school full time. And if you would just share that, that would be great.
Okay, we've been talking nothing but, how do we get our students back, and when is the best time to do it, and should we wait, or is it now? And there's only 6 weeks left if we're thinking about April. So why now? And I think a lot of the questions that we haven't even addressed yet tonight ask that very thing, why now? And who are not on IEPs but are struggling academically to come back to school 5 days. When teachers have advocated, and perhaps they're in the LST, which is a learning support team process, and it's clear that kids need more. And while we know that every student should be here full time, there are students for whom we feel it's important to get them in immediately. And I have data at Elmwood School that shows that students who started to return in 5 days around the holidays, it's been about, after the 6-week mark, we started to measure what kinds of progress did they make. And we can see that just the switch to 5 days with no additional academic support, but just being in a classroom with their teachers and peers has produced incredible progress. Parents are saying that their kids sort of feel better about doing school. They're happier, they're arguing less at home. And so I say, even if it's for 6 weeks, let's do the best we can to get our littlest learners back in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there were a couple of questions regarding concerns for our teachers and their having their mental health and their emotional needs and stress relief met. So I'm going to kind of read one, but know that there are a couple people that were concerned about retention and mental health for teachers. What is being done to address teacher burnout, stress, and social and emotional needs?
So I will start by saying that I think our building principals are very caring, nurturing, instructional building leaders. And I know that they care very deeply for all of the people on their faculties. And so I am really going to hand this over to them so they can talk a little bit about the kinds of things that, they have been trying to do, even within the gravity of a pandemic, to make things just a little bit better in their buildings.
Sure, I'll start. It's taking time to show appreciation and gratitude. I mean, that really goes a long way. At our last professional development day, the staff all had little spring flowers. They picked one, wrote messages of kindness and encouragement for others, and that is displayed in our lobby. So the children see it, they try to read some of the words and the phrases, and we just have explained, just as your bucket gets filled, we need our buckets filled too. This is hard. Recently, the HPTO brought in snacks and treats and all individual things, so it was safe to have out and share, but just, you know, sometimes it's a smile, it's a hello. It's not always treats or a message, but just really having the time, trying to support our teachers with time to plan their lessons, because how they go about it this year is very different than usual. They're working collaboratively and collectively so that it's a guaranteed curriculum across the grade level, remote, hybrid, whatever situation you're in. So trying to support our teachers with as much time as we can give them through our meetings and times that we might do other things typically, but recognize that they need that time to then be able to focus on their work.
I would totally agree. The time is the most critical piece. What our teachers are doing this year has required so much more planning than anything we've ever done before. And so the biggest piece that we can do as building administrators is recognize that and try and honor the need for that. I would say as a community of adults, Alan and Evan and I frequently talk with our young students about social media and positive messaging. And I think that is the biggest thing I can ask the community today, of all of us adults, to recognize the power of social media and the words that we all say. And the more we can remain positive to each other and show gratitude and hope for each other and recognition that this is hard for all of us, whether you're sitting in a classroom, whether you're sitting in central office, or you're sitting at home trying to manage things with your children. And I think that is the biggest thing that we can do for each other, is recognize that.
Yeah, I would, go ahead, Ann.
You go ahead, Alan. I'll go after you.
No, Ann, you go.
I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think one of the things I try to be really mindful of is that the teachers in many cases are feeling that they're attempting to do something that no one has ever done before. They haven't done it before, but neither has anyone else. And so they're really, they don't have a map to follow and if any of you know a teacher, you know what a perfectionist a teacher can be, and teachers like to be the ones who have the answers. And so this has put lots of people in a really uncomfortable situation. So what I can do is reassure people that what I see them doing is really incredible and mean it, because I do. Recognize the good things that I see happening. Also provide a lot of opportunities to show some grace when people need something. We've had people who are quarantining at home or have family that are sick. There have been so many situations this year where teachers need to know that I understand the extreme pressure that they're under, and that I'm not going to expect any more of them than I am bringing into the building, and that we're here to do it together. If they need something, Mr. Demon, my assistant principal, is incredible. He's in classrooms, he's supporting teachers in all the work they do. And we just keep saying, what do you need? What can we do? What do you need? What can we do? A lot of times they just need to know that if they need something, we'll be there to do it for them. The teachers are not asking for much, but it's a really challenging time. And just being present and being, as Lauren and Vanessa said, appreciative is really important.
Yeah, and I would just, echo what Ann, Lauren, and Vanessa had already said. A lot of giving people time to work on things and recognizing that we're all in this together, and finding time to share things, and having teachers share some of their successes, what's going well in their world, and sharing that with the rest of the staff. The HPTO, as somebody mentioned earlier, has done some teacher recognition things, which is incredibly appreciated. Even just little notes from teachers that come in, either to me or that I'm copied on, I try and share that with teachers. One thing that's been really powerful actually is, having faculty meetings or conversations with teachers, as we try and do from time to time, with, kind of something we call faculty coffee, which is now happening on Zoom, but people just sharing how amazing the students have been, really feeding off of the energy of the students have been, all the changes that they've endured, and how difficult it is to be in these odd looking classrooms where everybody's facing forward, and really feeling so positive about what's happening there. And I guess the other thing I would say is our guidance counselors have been working incredibly hard at building these schedules, working with our students, supporting them, and finding problems as we move forward. And so everybody, I guess, just kind of pitching in and working together has made this work, and recognizing that everybody's having a really difficult time right now, parents, students, and educators.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in really quick. I think that my principal colleagues articulated that really well. It's a challenge for us to meet the needs of all of our staff. This is a really tough time. I think we all know that, and you know, giving them the ability to work on their craft when we normally would have faculty meetings, and giving them that time is so important. But just letting them know that we hear them, and be as transparent as possible with every decision that we make, and offering the support. Having our doors always open. We try to do that at the high school. I know that we do that at the other levels as well. And I can't be more proud of the high school staff. They have just been tremendous during this past year, and the different schedule changes. And our teachers have such high expectations for themselves, and they want to do so well. And the amount of conversations I've had this year about people just not feeling like themselves, and they're not a good teacher anymore. And it's just so not true. I go into classes, I see such amazing things, and they're working so hard. We wish we could do more, but it's important to just be there for them, to listen, and to also let them know that we're struggling too. This is not easy on us either. Everyone in this group, the principals are a great group. I really enjoy their company and their camaraderie and their support and guidance, but it's tough on all of us, the nurses, the counselors in the district, the department heads. I mean, it's a lot of work, but people are going to do whatever it takes to bring our students back. And I think I said to the staff the other day, I see you at your best when you're physically safe and you're psychologically safe. And we're working to those areas. And that's what we need to get to. Vaccines would be great. I think we all would agree on that. But we want the kids to be back, but we want it to be in a safe way. And I think we're just doing everything we can to appreciate our teachers. We don't say it enough, and to support them for all the work that they do.
I can just add as well for the special education department, because oftentimes in our department, time is difficult to give back because we're bound by regulatory timelines. And with the backlog and what's happened with the pandemic, speaking for the whole department, ranging from teachers to team chairs to related service providers, they've worked just tirelessly, often without the opportunity for that break, if you will, because they're conscientious, because they care about your kids, and they're doing everything they can. And I agree with the principals. I mean, I appreciate what the principals are doing at the building level to support these folks. At the district level, I'm trying my very best to make sure that systems and structures are in place. I've budgeted for folks to get the work done. I've budgeted for professional development. I've had conversations with staff, difficult conversations as well as supportive conversations, and then recognizing that, you know, we're all people too. And to Evan's point, this is not easy, but we're in this together and we're better together. And that's what I so very much appreciate about the entire team and my entire department, including the nurses, Kathy Bain. I don't want to lose sight of the nursing staff who fall within my department as well, who work tirelessly around the clock. So thank you to everybody.
Yes.
So thank you all for all of the complete answers and really in-depth piece on this. I know that our teachers, our administrators, you're all what make our district so great, and just really appreciate the time that you took on this question in particular. Was somebody else about to say something? I feel like I cut somebody off.
No, I was just going to close that out by saying I just feel like our children are really lucky to have this group and all of our teachers, really.
Agree. So that, in the interest of time, I am going to move on to the Why Now tab, and that is Mr. Markey is going to do that.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. The first one we may have touched on a little before, especially Mrs. Carver did touch on it, but it's worth asking again and getting clarity. What is the #1 rationale to opening schools full-time now? What are the expected measurable outcomes?
I'll just jump in by saying I'm not even necessarily sure that I feel like there needs to be sort of measurable outcomes. But what I do think is that kids need school and they need their peers. And I mean, maybe Mrs. Carver said it best just a few minutes ago, is that when they start getting back into school and getting into the rhythm of the school, they actually start to feel that little bit of success. And I've always said with children, the minute they taste that success, they want more and more and more of it. And that really is what kind of motivates our kids. There's nothing better than that great intrinsic kind of feeling that they have when they've been successful with something. And I think we've been out of school now for a really long time. So I'm not looking for a single measurable something, but I am looking for kids to kind of get back in our schools and feel what school feels like, feel the successes and the rewards of it. Some of my other smaller reasons, I think that if we try it out now, we're going to feel a whole lot better over the summer and then into the fall. Last summer, there were so many what ifs and people were very heightened. If you can leave in June and have a summer that's more relaxed, it might just be worth it for everyone mentally. And feel free to jump in for anyone else who's thinking some other thought.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is, who is the ultimate decision maker for reopening schools? Is it the superintendent, the school committee? Could the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education or the governor mandate that schools open, even if people in a district disagree with that?
Commissioner Riley can, through regulatory change, say it's time to go back to school full time. So he has the authority to do that. As the superintendent who worked with a group of people, we submitted a proposal to the school committee, but ultimately, because this is a policy decision, it will be made by the school committee.
Great. So the next question is, the proposed Department of Education reopening regulations allow for a school district to apply for a waiver to alter its learning models for this year. Will the district consider applying for a waiver instead of opening the schools fully?
I think we addressed that one or a similar question earlier. And at this time, there's no plan to apply for a waiver. And I think that that would also be a good question for the school committee. And you know that you have your sort of working session on Sunday where this would become far more transparent to the community.
Right. Okay. Next question is about people who enjoy the hybrid model. Many hybrid families don't want the hybrid option. Eliminating the hybrid option entirely, is there a way to accommodate those who feel they're benefiting from the hybrid model while also meeting the needs of those who want to go back from hybrid to every day?
So this is one where I feel like, it's really unfortunate because I do know that there are some families and some students who are having great success in a hybrid model. They're navigating their asynchronous days beautifully. We have some high school kids who are working on their asynchronous days and it's really working for them. But unfortunately, in terms of scheduling, you can't quite do that because a teacher can't have half of her kids showing up and then all of her kids showing up, if you know what I mean. So if she had a classroom of 20, if 10 came every day and 10 came every other day, the 10 who were coming every other day would certainly be at a loss because the other group would be moving along at a pace that was quite different. So it just doesn't quite work. And you either have to go with everybody comes back full time and you maintain your remote and eliminate and dismantle your hybrid, or and I guess Jeffrey Riley will be making that decision very largely for our community.
Next question is about the focus of our energy on why are we so focused on the remaining few months of this school year instead of focusing on the fall? So would someone like to comment on whether we're also concurrently focused on the fall, or is all this focus on the next few months prohibiting us or making it hard to plan for the fall?
Well, one of the things I'll take that, and then I think I'm going to hand that off to Mrs. Rothermick and Tim Person. While it might appear that we are doing things that feel sort of short term. And maybe I just addressed this a few minutes ago that, what we're trying to do a little bit here is there's a lot of anxiety about coming back full time. And I truly understand that. And so if we do come back and people feel a little bit more psychologically safe, they will have the opportunity to feel psychologically safe now, and then maybe more so when we come back in September. But when you start to think about some of the expenditures, so people will say, oh, you're wasting all of that money on desks, but COVID-19 will still be a thing in the fall, and we are still probably going to need to have kids eating 6 feet apart. And if that's the case, we're going to need to make some of these purchases. So I think maybe if Mrs. Rothmick just wants to talk a little bit about some of the purchases we're making now that might help us in the fall.
Yes, thank you. So as we're planning, in terms of what does this look like in the next 6 weeks, if we were to come back, it does have long-term impact. Everything that we're spacing and we're learning how to do will become a long-term investment. And then once we decide, or once, this becomes an all clear, hopefully sometime next year, then anything that we have purchased then can be reabsorbed into the schools in a fashion. So we're looking at it, short term, but it's also long term. So the furniture that we're buying will be fully furnishing in the modulars. We'll be fully furnishing the 6 new classrooms for the high school. So we have intended uses for this furniture anyway.
Yeah, and I would just say that whatever we set up for the spring. In the fall, maybe we're making some tweaks to it over the summer, but it won't be, as Dr. Kavanaugh suggested, a mad dash to kind of figure out what our classrooms will look like. We think we'll have them 90% there with maybe some tweaks to the guidance as the summer rolls along.
Patient and budget.
Hi, thank you, Joe. Okay, so just to jump in, because we're running a little bit short on time. Please provide more information on how HPS will be adjusting the current budget to accommodate the additional staff, furniture, bus runs, and other expenses that are part of the return to full-time in-person teaching plan. Will there be a shortfall or cost overrun expected as a result of these additional requirements and needs? And I know you've addressed some of this, but just to kind of get a succinct answer.
Yes, so we right now currently have $325,000 of new funding for, you could call, COVID grants, if you will. So the expenses that we are incurring will be utilizing those grants. So we are not using the operating budget. We are not reducing services to students in any way to have this reopening. These grants, and then in addition, there is still more money, federal money, that is making its way through what they call the Biden package, which is about halfway through. So we do anticipate that there'll be even more money coming for school districts to really fully address all of these costs of bringing students back to school. So we do not anticipate taking any money from the operating budget for this.
Thank you so much. Okay, second question. This one is transportation related. Will we be able to sign up for buses for the remainder of the year? Doubling the students each day can make long pickup lines.
Yes, actually, we are actually encouraging families to use bus transportation. I know there's a lot of questions around traffic. So we are encouraging families to utilize the bus. So they can start emailing transportation if they have a date that they wish to begin. Some families have already said that they would like to begin back on the bus now. So that can happen now as well.
Thank you very much. Will the drop-off and pickup windows remain within the same 15-minute period, even with anticipated increased traffic flow due to full-time reopening?
So I will hand that off to Mr. Bishop.
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, so the plan right now is to continue with that. Right now, we let the students into the building at 7:15 and they report right to their first period class. Prior to COVID, the building would be open much earlier. Students would be able to grab breakfast, kind of hang around the building, which I would love. In the library, do some work, shoot some hoops in the gym. But obviously, given the circumstances, it's tough to have students around the building without supervision. And I know at the middle school, they have locations for classes to go, and we just don't have 4 separate spaces that would be able to house the 4 different classes. So we met with the police and fire right before vacation to talk a little bit about if we were to come back full time, do we need to talk about the traffic flow? And there's some conversations about maybe utilizing the loop road a little bit more during drop off. We're also looking to have a stipend position for anyone interested to help out in the morning with the traffic flow. What we really need is a lot of times during drop off, the students will be staying in their car because it's cold outside. I understand that. And then it just starts the traffic starts to get worse and worse. We really need those students to kind of get out of the car. And I'm hoping when the weather turns, we can be outside, and that wouldn't be such a bad thing before we let the students in at 7:15. Obviously it could rain, but you're hoping for the best weather. But so we're hoping with potentially a different traffic pattern. We have not ironed out any of the details on that, but having some support out in front of the building, making sure students are getting out of cars are driving off, trying to keep that flow going. We're really hoping for the best, but the traffic is always an issue, even in pre-COVID times, as we know, with the different buildings and different start times.
Yeah, we don't intend to make any changes in the middle school. I think what we have been doing has gone pretty well. We actually had to make a change, I think, in the first week that we opened, because we were only letting kids in at 7:15, but traffic was pretty substantial. As Mr. Bishop indicated earlier, we have places for all 3 grade levels to go. So we are opening our doors at 7 o'clock and letting kids into those spaces and keeping them physically distanced.
Okay, thank you. This one is a little specific, but I think it gets to a general question. So if my current middle school student gets driven by his high school brother, will there be other transportation available if the middle school has a different learning model than the high school? Will we have to pay for a bus pass for the remainder of the year if we cannot work out other accommodations?
So yes, once again, we are encouraging families to sign up for the bus. So if the high schooler is dismissed at 11:45 and o'clock, we are encouraging them to take the bus. And there is a bus fee. Because we are in the process of reimbursing our $200 original fee of 50%, which was what was discussed back in August. The actual cost for the year will be is actually reduced to $100. So the remaining part of the year is 50%, which is $50. So the bus fee for the remainder of the year is $50. And yes, we are encouraging families to take the bus.
Yes. And did we mention we want families to take the bus? So we really need families to take the bus.
Thank you very much. And I will now give it over to Amanda for sort of other groupings of questions that we couldn't quite put into these other categories.
Okay, thank you. Actually, as it turns out, most of these quote unquote other I think have been addressed, but we did receive a few questions in the Q&A. If you're hybrid, can you like to go remote?
So that one is an interesting question. We actually consulted with our legal counsel on that question, because when we adding to 6 feet of social distancing in a classroom, and because we're reducing that to 4, that leaves them the opportunity to say, I don't want to come in if our classrooms are going to be at 4 feet of social distance. So hybrid families who are staunchly opposed to coming in at 4 feet can certainly move to a remote setting, according to our legal counsel, and that will mean that they do get a new teacher. And I know that when that survey went out asking that question, people were, sort of very offended by it and thought that we were talking about a new teacher in a punitive way. But in reality, we just wanted people to know what it was that we were asking in terms of that question. So I apologize to families if they felt offended, but in truth, we just wanted to be transparent.
Thank you. Hi, and thanks to everyone involved. Realizing this is a bit early for this question, is there a timeline or specific date the school committee is now comfortable with taking a working session this Sunday? There's a lot of information. This tonight has been invaluable both for the community and for us. So we're getting a lot of information. We're meeting on Sunday. And what I anticipate is that it will be an agenda item on all of our upcoming meetings. We're not exactly clear when the vote will be ready for the vote, but we have a meeting on March 11th, and it will be on there. If we're prepared at that time, we'll take the vote at that time. And if we're not, we'll have to take it another time. So we are moving as efficiently and as we can through this process, just like everybody else. And I think I have to give props to the school committee, because the 5 volunteer members of the school committee have worked incredibly hard this year. And I know they take this particular assignment extraordinarily seriously. So we are putting a lot of time and effort into really doing the best job we can. The slides are not posted on the superintendent's page as stated. If they're elsewhere, can you please provide a link? I think that is referring to tonight's slides, Dr. Kavanaugh. Will you be making those slides available? I know they're hot off the press for this meeting, so.
They surely are. I mean, I think we were finishing them at about 5 o'clock.
It does look like staggering and staging of reopening will be enforced, which disadvantages the older high school learners. Why no proposed date yet for high school, and how long delayed opening expected to be? I don't know, Dr. Cav, do you want to answer that? I think there was a proposal of dates you put forward before at the beginning of the meeting. Those were sort of some new dates, but.
Sure. You know, it's interesting because when we consulted with our legal counsel about what date should we even put into that report. And her suggestion was that we put in March 29th. She said the beauty of putting in March 29th is it's probably the most aggressive date that you could put in there. To be honest with you, I don't really know if March 29th is going to work in terms of moving 10,000 pieces of furniture all around this district, or having furniture even delivered to the district. But her point in saying that was that by putting a really aggressive date in there, you're maximizing your time bringing children back in to learn in person this year. So in having discussions about what to put in that document, we put in March 29th for tonight, K-5, a proposed date of April 5th for 6 to 8, and then really had been batting around a lot of different ideas for 9 to 12, and wouldn't want to make that decision really without some input from Mr. Bishop. Some of the things we talked about is how the population at the high school gets lesser in the spring because people go for internships and seniors will start to leave the building. We also talked about if we are bringing 1,000 students into that high school, and we know some things about the transmission of the virus with older students. So we just left that as a TBD for today, and we'll see where that goes.
Thank you. I think I probably have one more question I can take. Let's see. What about labs for remote students? Do remote students do MCAS? So final question about remote students. Anybody know the answer? I've stumped the panel.
I thought maybe Mr. Bishop might want to speak about the remote and labs.
Yeah, so that will continue to be very similar to what it has been now. So we have a combination of some of our teachers teaching remote science classes, but there's also some students that are taking some tech or VHS science classes, and then some students live streaming into our science classes. So we've been conducting labs to the best of our ability since the beginning of the year in those different kind of platforms, and we'll continue to do that through the remainder of the year.
And I can add, in terms of the MCAS, yes, remote learners are going to be invited in to take the MCAS in our schools. There is no option from the Department of Education to take the MCAS in a remote manner. So at this time, we have information that will be sent out to our remote families early next week regarding our plans for our remote students to come into the buildings for the MCAS.
Okay. Well, it's 8:58 on my clock, and I'm not getting any messages from eHub, but I think we're okay. We have done a lot of good work tonight. I really, really, really appreciate all of you taking this extra time. I respect your time. I want you to be done by 9. And I just really want to thank you for being so forthcoming with information. And I know much of this was probably decided 2 hours ago or 2 minutes ago, or is going to be decided in 5 minutes. And I really just want to thank you. School committee members, do you have any last comments before we wrap up?
Just really grateful to all of you for taking so much time and using your hearts and your heads together to solve these impossible problems. We're really grateful.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Meg's hearts and heads, and I think we should once again say thank you to the reopening.
Because, every question a parent asked may be a question that I didn't know to ask. And so having you all here answering these hard questions really, really helps us to gather all the data we need to make these decisions. And I know it's been a super long day for you, but we really, really appreciate it.
Echo all of my colleagues, and also just want to say a special thank you for all the behind the scenes work that happened, not just today, but the days leading up to it. Amanda, for your tireless computer ability to help me with some of the computer things, as well as all that you put into this. And I am looking forward to continuing this discussion on Sunday, and appreciate all the comments that we've received from the community and also some teachers as well by email. So thank you to everybody.
Same here. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. We need your input so that we can avoid mistakes, and it's kind of an open source effort here. If you see something that doesn't look right, ask, and we'll see if we can make you do this the right way. So I guess just thanks to everyone. This is not, I guess this is a very complex problem, and as such, there's many different viewpoints. There's a lot of stakeholders, and I just want to kind of emphasize that this is not a war. It's not a battle. If you hear people that are speaking in that way, help them take a deep breath and help them reframe their frustration as a constructive question. And I think we can all come out of this in a much better place if we remember that. So thanks again for all the energy and for the contributions tonight. And especially thanks to Amanda, our chair, and to EHOP.
Okay, so I'm going to let you go. I just want to go quickly through the next steps. So Sunday we have a meeting. The school committee, it is televised on HCAM. Thank you, HCAM, tireless effort. We have a meeting next Thursday, March 11th. Tomorrow is the commissioner's hearing, where some of these things will be finalized. We think, we assume. So it's important to watch that, watch the news. And thank you so much. Have a really good night.
Amazing team, this amazing, exhausted, overworked, just great. You are all amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, have a good night. I think I might need a motion to adjourn. Do I need a motion to adjourn? I think it's an official meeting. So a school committee member, somebody, I need a motion to adjourn.
That's me.
Meg.
Adjourn.
Okay. Second by Leah, and I need a roll call vote. Meg?
Yes.
Leah?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Nancy?
Yes.
And I'm an aye as well. Thank you to EHOP. Thank you to all. And it is 9:02 and we are adjourned. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.